If you don't build the B52, you don't ever get to the, the engine generation of the, the 777.
Lennar peaked this year at about $173 a share, and at its low over the last 3 or 4 months has been at 102. So it's like a 40% drop. I think the intelligence amplification is a more apt description of what this is today. Artificial intelligence is a better description of what it will be.
Fisher Island, Miami Beach is the most expensive zip code in the United States.
Episode 55 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times. Jeff, it's good to be back with you today. It's fantasy football season, and that means a lot of time for me spent in my off time away from my family for the only hobby that I can manage.
Well, I think we all need something to look forward to and be diverted by. And I don't know what it is, Mark. I tend to look forward to football season as well. I'm not smart enough, I think, to do the fantasy football with any real success. So I haven't gotten into that as much as I know you have, but it really is. It's just a fun time of year. I mean, things are starting to cool down a little bit. I think I saw our last 100+ day forecast in the temperature. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Just as a side note, it struck me, and I'm curious about your perspective on fantasy football. It struck me what a genius move it is for them to just engage this whole fantasy like ecosystem, because having games, I've got my team or maybe a player that I'm interested in from college that I follow a little bit is one level of engagement, but just the whole business model around like having people caring about what's happening in most games throughout each week has to drive viewership and like revenue dollars. It's really struck me as an incredibly insightful way to market the NFL product.
Well, and it's worked out that, this sort of appointment viewing that NFL Sundays or Thursday night football or Monday night football, that's a big component of how this fits in. And, so each week everybody's playing at once. I've always felt like the NBA should probably try and follow a model like that, baseball quite a bit harder. But it is so conducive to like the fantasy football, week to week competition with another team one way or another. And I mean, in my own demented perspective, I don't like just sitting in front of the TV. I love sports. It is probably my biggest hobby passion. But I don't like just sitting on the couch watching all this stuff. I can do it, but I sort of have some guilt at the end of the day or weekend, or season, as it turns out. Yeah. But somehow for me, I get really into this fantasy football stuff. But I do feel like a participant in it all on a much deeper level. I go kind of big at it, but I think that aspect of me, I probably wouldn't watch the NFL if it wasn't for it. So I think the term fantasy football probably hurts a little bit, much like a trainee hurts those new getting into the appraisal space. So we got a branding problem there that we've got to work around. But so good times. I love this time of year for sure.
Well, it seems to be a relatively effective approach that they've taken, even if the naming isn't ideal. But, it's interesting to hear you talk about that. Yeah, I mean, they've made a consumer out of you in a way that you just wouldn't be without this aspect or like this way of engaging with it. And I think a lot about like March Madness, in the NCAA basketball too. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, how many regular season games do you watch or even know are going on? But as soon as you fill out a bracket and have a vested interest in 64 teams, most of which you don't know anything about or very little about, you're still interested. Now, you may or may not sit down and watch the whole game, but you get a lot more viewership than you would just throughout the season. So I just can't help but see some of these things and think, man, that's really interesting how they drive engagement in this entertainment product in a way that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Does anything embody two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times more than fantasy football discussion? And the theme of this podcast is really trying to cover a lot of the movement, like industrial revolution, digital revolution level movement that we are in the middle of right now. And I think the sports world is certainly no stranger to that movement right now. And I think your comments on fantasy football are one that has really impacted positively football, but baseball was kind of the originator of this fantasy content, kind of roto whatever, and they're doing okay, but fantasy is not driving it the same way. And then the NBA, all the story this last season is the drop in viewership and what's going on here one way or another. And their game is changing, where it's all threes and slam dunks, and some of the nuance of the game that made it beautiful is at least temporarily changed a little bit. And so all these sports are trying to evolve, some winning, some not winning. And it's just a ton of change all over.
There really is, and it's my nerdy markets approach, that has me interested in this a little bit. But I think the change, that you're talking about is exactly, kind of at the heart of what I'm just observing is, the way that the NFL is consumed today is a lot different than it was, 20 years ago or whatever. And it's just interesting to see how certain products adapt to fit an evolving market need and demand, and others don't. Of course, there are a lot of parallels between that and what we're seeing in the appraisal space and the real estate space. Last week, we talked about and showed a list of real estate companies, that were kind of new on the scene, not your traditional, names that you're used to seeing in the brokerage space. And so just this whole theme of how do you adapt or die, within a market. And just because I'm successful today doesn't mean I will be tomorrow. And just because I don't have massive market share today doesn't mean I can't tomorrow. But, the way that things evolve, I think, it's just interesting to, on the outside, look in and observe or comment on.
My last thought on the topic is, golf is no stranger to this right now. And one of the folks that is part of the All In podcast, Chamath, that we listened to, was a partial owner in the Golden State Warriors and recently sold out. I think it turned out to be an incredible investment over 15, 20 years during their championship runs and all that sort of stuff. But he got out and said that sports franchise values are peaking right now, most likely in his estimation, and is using the example of the Live Tour financed by the Saudis that took the PGA Tour on head on, and luring away. And why is that stuff happening? I think in large part it's happening because of data availability to individual users and all of this streaming content. It's not the three major networks that control the distribution of the viewership, but also then how all of this stuff runs. And you can stream this content out, and there's just all sorts of avenues to create something out of thin air, and it's going to challenge a lot of these folks on a whole number of topics in the sports arena. So I don't know. We are certainly not the only ones going through major change. Yeah,
no doubt. I may have commented on this previously, but All In did an interview with an F1 driver, and it's just interesting to hear about the evolution of that sport, right? I mean, those teams were operating at significant losses for a long time until they get enough eyeballs and advertising revenue and some kind of innovations with some of the players in that space, that make it very profitable today. It's a lot of this stuff just evolves. It's interesting to see. On the topic of evolution, Mark, I do have to make this comment. I pointed out to you offline that the last episode that we recorded before you had a haircut did way worse than the episode that we did with just us with the haircut. So I'm taking that as an audience vote of confidence or vote that the haircut looks good. I had to harass you about it since we actually have empirical data to support one versus the other, I think.
This is a real test of who my master is, Jeff. Is it the viewers or is it my wife who thinks I now have a small head? I don't know. So we'll we'll see who wins out there. It is cooler, and I appreciate that. And so I'm liking the easy maintenance.
Yeah, is a small head better than big head? I don't know, but
I don't know. Yeah. Well. I don't think this is a trend for us now. Well, I don't think it is going to be an ongoing theme here, Jeff, but we do have a prepared meme of the episode. Some of you may have seen this before circling around the interwebs. For the audio listeners, it is the meme at the top that is having the initial Raptor engine, which is the engine that the SpaceX rockets use. And it is about the most complicated and confusing and likely inefficient design of a rocket that you could imagine. And the latest version, I think probably several iterations later, is about the most beautiful and simple by comparison rocket with all of its complications, rocket science, and how simple it is. And it's so the meme reads for the first picture: you make it exist first and you make it good later. I think this might sum up the philosophy of launching anything, but certainly UAD 3.6 from every perspective out there, from the GSEs rolling it out, from lenders and appraisal management companies trying to get on board with it, to appraisers learning how to handle it. What do you think about this?
Boy, I love this image, and for anybody who's listening on audio, it would be worth jumping over, looking this up on YouTube just to see, because you can describe it, but it's hard to capture, what the image really encapsulates. But I think it's a really good analogy, Mark, that UAD 3.6 is going to feel a lot like this Raptor engine on top that that has things going everywhere. It probably next to impossible to really try to wrap your head around with just an initial exposure to it. I think that it will evolve into, in terms of workflow for appraisers and even those that use appraisals, the reports are going to look a lot different. I mean, anybody who gets their hand on an appraisal done in the new version, the report is just going to look a lot different than what they're used to seeing as well. In time, maybe I think it can become this elegant thing. And now it's probably worth the disclosure that I've got no vested interest in the success or failure of UAD 3.6. I'm not like out here, advocating for it necessarily. It's here, and we're going to have to learn it whether we like it or not as appraisers. So we may as well learn it as opposed to complain about it and hate it and still have to live with it anyway. But this image just a picture paints 1,000 words in this case for sure, because I think we've lived this trying to start a business that is difficult and messy and complicated, and probably not as elegant as the most recent version of the Raptor engine. But it's just kind of the way of building and evolving, anything, is that if you don't ever get to the top image that's messy as all get out, but at least gets to a point of working at some functional level, you don't have the opportunity to iterate to the point that you get a more elegant, refined, effective solution. I was just listening to something, and my memory is not as good as I wish it were, but they were drawing an analogy between the thrust of one of the jet engines on a modern day 777 jetliner, like passenger or commercial jetliner, and I think it was the B-52 bomber, and that one single engine on the modern 777 had the same thrust as the combined thrust of, and I forget how many engines that the B-52 had, but it's kind of the exact same like illustration here, that in time it gets better as you have time to focus on it. But if you don't build the B-52, you don't ever get to the the engine generation of the the 777.
Yeah, excellent point. And I think this engine and the pictures of this are just such a perfect encapsulation of that. And I don't want this message to be either lost on for appraisers out there or overlooked by appraisers out there, Jeff. Pete Fontana, we had on the podcast a few episodes ago. I was not expecting and a bit surprised to see an estimation of some 15 or 20% of appraisers leaving the industry really cited as reason of UAD 3.6. I talked to one of the country's large builders, appraisal panel managers, and has maybe even a more aggressive estimate of people leaving. Coming away from Val Expo, this is a very common perception that we see out there, that there are a lot of people exiting. And I would challenge appraisers to look at these two engines and say, yeah, the first 20, 30, 50 of these UAD 3.6 reports that you complete might resemble that first picture in really inefficient and overly complicated Raptor engine of a decade ago in creating born date or whatever. But that by the time you get to UAD 3.6 number 75 or 100, it's going to feel a lot more like that bottom Raptor engine. And you probably will even forget how you completed a lot of 1004s. It won't be long before that sort of thing happens. And so I've been a little alarmed. What's best for them, they should do for sure. But then I can't move forward. I have no desire to. I imagine it's not as bad as we're making it up.
I think that's right, Mark. And, as you described that, there's some aspect of the current environment in which we write appraisal reports that is not that dissimilar from this top engine that's just messy as all get out. What happens in today's report environment is if you want to expand anything beyond what's built into the form, discussion, analysis, additional data, it all gets dropped somewhere else in the appraisal. And I think every appraiser on the planet has had the experience of saying, I answered this question that the client's coming back, asking for a revision on. It's right there in the report. Well, the appraiser knows where it is in like 15 or 20 pages into the report in a whole bunch of text that isn't that obvious to find. And I think that the new version, where you have everything addressed, in a more structured format, so everything about the improvements or the site or whatever doesn't have to get dropped into some page, kind of like the headline story that gets continued on page 10 or 12 or 20 in the newspaper. You kind of have in today's environment, the same thing happen with, I'm trying to tell a story about some weird thing going on with the property, and I can't do it all in the same place in the current form. So it has the potential to, be a better product and output in the long run. I definitely heard representatives from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac say that they ran test groups of consumers reading reports in the proposed new format, and it made more sense to them, than what we have today. So again, I mean, it's here. It is kind of what it is, but I think you make a really good point in the comparison between the two.
Well, I know a lot of people that are appraisers that don't talk to the amount of people that we do out there. I've even heard a couple of times. This is just everybody's guess right now, but it isn't all just this is going to take 40% more time to complete. That there are even some that look at the what they know now, the data points, and say that for their particular type of assignments that they order, might even take a little bit less time, to complete. And I don't fully understand how they form that opinion, but those opinions do exist out there. And maybe there's going to be some truth to that once we get a little down the road. So probably not all puppy dogs and rainbows, and also not the end of the world. So somewhere in between, Jeff.
Yeah, we're going to have to keep growing and evolving. I think that's well said. And I love that you found and then shared this image, because I think this could apply to so many different things. It fits this very narrowly defined topic very well, but it resonates with a lot of efforts and things I've tried to do over the years. And nothing is as perfect. You just don't start with the refined, elegant solution. You want to, that's what you envision from the get-go. There's just a whole lot of work that goes into getting to the make it good later, aspect. And I think some people fall out because they're not willing to do the grind to get to that point. It's just that I want it to be there now, and it's not, and it's hard to get there. And so a lot of initiatives fall flat because of that. But it's made a lot of sense to me.
Just make it exist first. You can make it good later. So there we go. All right. Well, Jeff, we've got a lot of topics on the docket here, a lot going on. Where to start, I think, is the question. We do have an order here, but there's one that we just missed last episode. That the news came out, I think, in between us recording and us publishing, that I really wanted to comment on, or wanted us to comment on. And that is our dear friend and wizard, investing wizard, Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, at least. I don't know how active he is right now, but has announced the ongoing purchase of major stakes in both homebuilders, Lennar and D.R. Horton. Kind of, when he does these things, he does them quietly. You can see that Berkshire Hathaway is moving chips around. You can see that happens from metadata, but you never know until the initial or the eventual announcement in sort of a quarterly filing. And so we got that this week, and it's an enormous stake there, Jeff. What do you think they are seeing in making large bets like this in the housing market?
It's really interesting to see what he chooses to invest in. And I think we can even marry the two topics that are near and dear to our heart, the housing market and artificial intelligence, which helped collate and pull together some of this information and research. But, to answer your question, Mark, one of the things that stands out is there's a summary here that says, their combined investment between Lennar and D.R. Horton represents $1 billion of exposure in the home building industry. I read this as them saying and investing in the fact that there's still something of a housing shortage. As we're seeing markets turn, it's hard, maybe hard to envision that. One of the things appraisers have heard a lot of when things were really busy is an appraiser shortage. And it feels like a shortage until you're not busy anymore and you need more work. And then all of a sudden it's not a shortage. And with housing, I think sometimes it can feel oversaturated or undersupplied depending on how quickly it takes me to sell my house when I list it for sale. And you and I have been interestingly following trends that vary around the country, northern states versus southern states and how different markets are doing. In fact, we may have a few other slides we may get to on that, but Warren knows what he's doing and is, makes these decisions based on a lot of, deep research that they do on their end. And my takeaway is they think that there's more room for new construction to take place. There's more demand, even in an evolving market scenario is my take. But what are your thoughts, Mark? You read it the same way or do you have different perspective on it?
Yeah, I do, Jeff. I mean, I clearly Buffett has a long history of buying kind of quote unquote, I say boring businesses, but they're just super established. They've been around forever. What they do. They have already changed an industry and he just waits for a good price. And, Lennar, I had not been following it this closely, but, Lennar peaked this year at about $173 a share. And at its low over the last 3 or 4 months has been at 102. So it's like a 40% drop. And I think this is around the time that Buffett was accumulating their position. So I think there is just an opportunity there on the buy side. The stock just went on sale. The business isn't changing much in the long term. The stock just went on sale. But it is a recognition of an overall trend that we have a shortage of homes, maybe millions of homes short of the supply that the United States needs. And we've covered this in the beginning of market moves. And I think this is a little controversial, at least, or polarizing. I think many say there is not much of a shortage. I disagree with it. And I think that it's sort of come from the great financial crisis now 17 years ago. But, we had a 2 or 3 year, it was just impossible to borrow money for land development. Impossible like that. And that's not even that's not an exaggeration on any level. You couldn't do it. And we've never really made up for that, save maybe the last little bit during this high interest rate period. And so I think we have a big shortage. I think this pairs well with the data point that we saw this week that new sale prices, the median price is now just a tick below existing home prices. And that's a complicated comparison, of course, but what I think it signals is that homeowners or home builders have been attacking the market that existing homes just can't get. They're building inexpensive houses that meet the affordability problem that no other U.S. housing stock can really meet. And I think that's probably considered the opportunity going forward for a while. And look out if we get interest rates to cooperate and the economy to cooperate. I think if you get those three things, there's just going to be a lot of building here. For those of us that have been so deep in the pit over the last 2.5 years of this high interest rate and no mortgage transaction, pretty knowledgeable, unbiased guy that is an opportunist is looking at our industry and saying, hey, maybe the next 5 to 10 years aren't so bad.
Yeah, absolutely. He certainly sees an opportunity. As you were talking, I pulled up the stock price or stock chart for Lennar specifically, and it's definitely come down a lot. It's interesting, Mark, that during COVID, from about 2020 through 2023, their stock price was pretty flat. I mean, those were very busy times, and there wasn't a whole lot of movement. The price ran up in 23 and 24 and now has dropped off in 25, which is what Berkshire appears to be buying. But just interesting to see that they seem to see an opportunity here. Anecdotally, I can tell you, one of my brothers that buys and sells real estate as an agent for individuals, really likes working with the local DR project in part, and other local builders as well, but in part because they can offer better financing, because they can compete in ways that the existing home sellers can't, as you've said, in a couple of ways. One, they've got a little more price flexibility. They're willing and able to buy down rates on behalf of buyers to help bridge that affordability gap and issue that your traditional, one-off seller is less inclined to do. Maybe they're reasonably well positioned to continue building into the future. One of the takeaways I had, with a conversation with somebody at one of these builders at the AXE conference earlier this spring, was they were saying, we're not selling as much, but we keep building. Like, we're not stopping building. Home builders build. Like, that's what we have to do to keep that's our business model. Maybe it wasn't just blindly building, hoping for buyers to come, but it looks like, that there is still a market. It's just the affordability issue. And I think you said it well, that the home builders have a little more flexibility to address some of the affordability concerns than, those that might otherwise be looking at being upside down in a home, or need to get a maximal price to be able to move to whatever their next, purchase is going to be.
So, Jeff, I'd like to say, Mr. Buffett, welcome to the struggle here, and we're happy to have another advocate on board. I mean, that's got to have enormous influence. Or maybe the way to look at this is I don't remember the new CEO's names that's taking over the reins as Buffett steps back. Maybe this is his first investment, and he's already proving that he doesn't know as much and won't be as successful as Munger and Buffett. So we'll see there. But a lot on the line with this bet, and it is encouraging. I think it's encouraging for everybody investing in this market and trying to look at what this thing looks like 5 years from now.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Mark. And we'll see. I mean, maybe this turns out to be a continuation of the Munger and Buffett genius, and maybe it's a rapid detour in terms of how successful the bet and the investment is. One thing on this topic before we shift gears, I wanted to just share as well, and in fact, as I'll look at the next slide, it was really interesting. I knew, and you and I had both seen some headlines around this investment that Buffett's company had made. I typed into chat, like, what happened, and like, tell me about this recent investment that Berkshire Hathaway made. So it gave us the summary that was basically that first slide. The thing that just caught my eye, Mark, is chat, after it summarizes what the investment was, how much the total investment represented, and that sort of thing. Chat prompted me, and I don't know if I feel used or manipulated or not, but after answering my question, it said, hey, let me know if you want a breakdown of the strategic significance behind these investments or how they fit into Buffett's broader portfolio approach, which was along the lines of the question you were asking me as we had researched that. So I said, yeah, that sounds good. Why don't you tell me that? And so, and anybody viewing on YouTube can see my prompt basically affirming, yeah, that sounds good. And so then it jumped further in to give additional detail. It's just fascinating how AI is evolving. We've commented on this recently, but it's such a big shift that we just all of a sudden take for granted, that it used to be trained on historic data, and now it's able to search the web and get real-time information. But not only is it doing that, it's anticipating what you might want to know about a certain topic. And it almost just makes the researching fun. I can't tell if I should feel like it's a little bit creepy, that it's like looking inside of our minds a little bit to know what we want to ask next. And I mean, you personify it in ways that's clearly not what it's actually doing, but it feels that way a little bit.
Yeah, Jeff, this is a good opportunity to take a slight detour on a segued topic here, which is another conversation that you had with the large language model and shared with me, reviewing Andrej Karpathy, who was leading Tesla's full self-driving systems for a while. Now is kind of just gone off on his own. Is a little bit more in like a educational space, independent about artificial intelligence. And this really hit home to the thing I've talked about ad nauseum, and I'm sure it's to the point of annoyance to our listeners a little bit, but like this reminder that all language models are doing is this next word guessing and all of that. And it really is at the core. I think what he is suggesting is that artificial intelligence is really a misnomer for what's happening. And it's a buzzword that is marketable. He doesn't make that point, but that is the case, and probably where it's coming from. But he had thought deeply about renaming it. And the phrase or terminology he came up with was intelligence amplification. And, Jeff, that just resonates with me totally. And I think what the chat just did for you is intelligence amplification. Let me help you be smarter. You weren't going to ask this question, but you should have. Can I prompt you with that and see if you'll take the bait? And in just consolidating the 10 blue links and all of those things that are out there too, that is so much what's happening. And I think that really puts the right frame around how we use and how we develop and how we build within the large language model ethos.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Although it's worth noting that increasing my intelligence is a pretty low bar to clear. So yeah. It's probably not that impressive that it made me look smarter. Another thing I probably shouldn't confess, but I will. Maybe we can have like a confessional section on the the podcast here, Mark. We can dress you up like a priest or something, and I can confess all of my sins. So I was sitting in church on Sunday, and you got curious about this, so I was typing in some stuff. I did find the quote. So on X, Karpathy had wrote, about this intelligence amplification. He said, "I'm playing around with calling our tech as it is today IA," and the fun part with that is just inverting the AI, right? Intelligence amplification instead of AI. IA have the vibe of tools for thought needing human interaction and resemble a lot more of what we actually have today. AI feels more like independent, long-running agents. So I think he's defining AI as like something that becomes more autonomous, more like AGI or something in that space, where these large language models are this amplification of intelligence. And it's just, I find a lot of these small little insights that just help me to better kind of comprehend and internalize what this tool, what this technology is, how it works. I feel like, we're just scratching the surface of understanding what it is today. It's evolving so quickly. It's a little bit intimidating to try to keep up with, but it's fascinating as heck. I mean, it really is a lot of fun to be trying to keep up with it, because it's just, there's just so much nuance to what it is and how it operates that the better we understand it, the better off we are, I think. But it's trying to understand a moving target for sure.
Boy, yeah, I think the intelligence amplification is a more apt description of what this is today. Artificial intelligence is a better description of what it will be. And the kings that are really competing on the battlefield here, the Sam Altmans and Satyas and Elon Musk and all of that are, they were using, artificial general intelligence or super intelligence, I think. I don't remember which one now, but they've sort of changed the phraseology. I think the artificial general intelligence was maybe scaring off people, but super intelligence was just a little bit better language model that had some agents and that sort of thing, And so you can see everybody sort of branding and trying to figure out there what we should call these things. But artificial intelligence is where all this is going. Make no mistake. Intelligence amplification is probably closer to where we are today.
I really like the delineation between those, because where we are today is certainly not where we'll be tomorrow. But these things are designed, and in some of the other stuff I read from Karpathy, he's arguing for that we should continue to develop these in a way that require human interaction and that aren't just fully autonomous. And I'd have to. That quote I don't have in front of me, but I mean, at least that was one of the takeaways I had in reading some of his information on it, Mark. And that makes sense to me, that to the extent that these are increasingly intelligent tools that are designed to be interacted with by humans, that feels like a future that I would be more excited about, as opposed to a bunch of fully autonomous intelligences that are doing who knows what, behind the scenes. And I mean, and then that fear is maybe just fed in by a lot of the sci-fi movies and TV shows and stuff of the machines taking over the world. I think that's been a concern of Elon and others, is that if we're not intentional in how this evolves, it can certainly get away from us. Something smarter than me, is probably a difficult adversary to try to take on. Me being humanity collectively, there are a lot of people smarter than me, but it's interesting to see where it could go. But the framing and thinking of it as intelligence amplification definitely resonates with my experience in interacting with it today.
Very good, Jeff. Well, I think there's no super easy segue into the next topic here, but another one that I really wanted to talk about this was a really interesting topic to me. And when the big beautiful bill passed, there's like all of these bills, it's 1,000+ pages, and who the hell knows what all is encompassed in that. And Trump has done a lot of things around energy production and kind of this renewable sort of thing that have been mind-blowingly off base. I think as well as I understand some of these things that I like a side topic, like your St. George native Trevor Milton, who is with Nikola. He pardoned him. It's just such a shyster. I feel like, and I sort of energy related. I don't understand it at all. But also in the big beautiful bill is ending energy subsidies. I personally didn't agree with the energy subsidies for electric vehicles in the same way. So I'm fine with that removal, but I was really surprised that the residential solar 30% tax credit was removed from the big beautiful bill. And since then, even yesterday, Trump had a just excoriating message towards solar and wind. And I think wind maybe a little less supportable than solar, but so it's like, gosh, what are we going in the wrong direction? Because we need all of this electricity. We have all of these roofs, and other countries are showing us that that this is a viable option, at least in the short term. And we're going in the opposite direction. And Chamath sent a tweet that was totally contrary to my perspective when this big beautiful bill passed. And it is just the starting sentence, Jeff, is residential solar in the U.S. will be an enormous growth category going forward. Like, what on earth? When you remove the 30% tax credit that was already sort of only modestly expanding solar, and then you remove that, that feels like it's going to go the wrong direction. But what you see reading down this thread is an expansion of TPO, or third-party ownership solar, in residential. And what I have come to learn is that the commercial tax credits are not being removed, may be removed mid-2026, but might be extended and last through the end of 2027. And that essentially means that there is still incentive and almost no incentive for the residential homeowner to do this, but there is a lot of incentive for these corporate groups to come in and install solar on your home for a variety of reasons, to sell you back electricity at a cheaper rate. To maybe it's a lease arrangement or just selling you electricity back, or just using your roof as a destination to collect energy to get into the grid. There's a lot of benefits to that, less upfront costs, but so much to say for Chamath here, who I think is quite aware of renewable energy generation and has been a big proponent of that by any means necessary. That we're going to have a boom in residential solar, and so I guess I'll stop there, Jeff. I was just really interested by that. I think appraisers are going to see a whole heck of a lot less owned solar in our appraisals going forward.
So there are a couple of thoughts there, Mark, on that last point that you made. Right now, for lending purposes, unless the solar is owned by the homeowner and doesn't have a isn't leased and actually owned by a third party, doesn't have independent financing with a separate lien against the solar, in those scenarios, the lenders making a mortgage loan do not want that value of the solar panels considered, because if the homeowner doesn't really own it, it's not really value that accrues to the homeowner. If there's an independent lien on the property where the solar panels themselves could actually be repossessed. Mortgage lenders don't want to make a loan in that scenario, but if the homeowner owns the solar panels outright, or used a home equity line or some other debt instrument against the real property, then that can be included. From the appraiser's perspective, it's easier not to measure from the market what the market's response is to the contributory value of those solar panels. So it's interesting. I mean, it's important to understand what the ownership structure is of the solar panels when you're appraising a property. Zooming out though on that topic, Mark, Chamath's concluding statement, says it's a runaway freight train that will benefit U.S. consumers over the next decade. It'll be interesting to see, if and how that plays out. I think one thing that's definitely certain is energy consumption and demand for electricity is certainly going up with the build out of data centers, and even, just naturally with a growing population, you're going to have some base level of increased need. But I'm very confident that the growing population of artificial intelligence, large language models, data centers is far outpacing the U.S. population growth. And those are much more power hungry. We need power from kind of all sources, available. One thing that's been interesting to me a little bit is when Tesla acquired the solar roof company, I expected that, man, if it does what Elon says, it's not going to be any more expensive to build solar into the roof of new construction. And I do think that could still be a reality going forward. It definitely makes a lot of sense to me that you have an integrated solar capture system into just the original construction and design of the home. That makes a lot of sense. My wife's commented to me that these after the fact, big black panels that get stuffed on the roof and that don't even cover the whole roof, or it's kind of a patchwork look, aesthetically, she doesn't care for it. And I definitely understand that perspective. I don't know that I think it looks that great either. I think that the way that the solar capture happens will evolve over time as well. But I kind of thought that it would have evolved differently than it has to this point. And maybe I was just expecting it to happen too soon, or maybe missed the mark in some way. But it's been interesting to see where we're at today.
Well, it is, Jeff. Yeah, I guess you do when you do these analyses, and Sandy Adamatis, kind of dubbed the Queen of Green, and teaches a lot of these solar and green courses for the Appraisal Institute, has said, man, yeah, it is really hard to support the cost of the owned solar installation, just on a dollars comparison there. And I don't know why we haven't found the groove yet. Even with 30% subsidies and all, maybe our utility costs need to go up, like the just standard electricity, to justify it even more. So U.S. has done a good job at keeping electricity prices down, although my household would not agree with that here lately. But so I think we're still struggling to find the groove to get this. Chamath is suggesting here that we are finding that groove and that it's going to explode. I hope so. And I think the Tesla roofs, as best I can tell, just ended up being far too expensive, almost not economical at all on an existing roof, and maybe only makes sense on a new construction, but still are a lot extra. So they're beautiful. I don't know how they hold up in the hail and all the other element, disruptions that occur. So I think interesting there, but I wanted to note just electricity generation is going to be so freaking critical. China is destroying the United States in new electricity coming online from every different source. And they have been kicking our tails on the solar element. They make all the solar panels, and they are installing them on every roof that can fit one, it seems. And so, they're by an order factor of like 10 or more, they are adding electricity online compared to the US. And I think since Trump's come in, and with the focus on artificial intelligence, say, hey, we're going to need a lot more. We are way behind. Let's get nuclear. Let's get, everything else we can get going. And so we clearly need to do it. And, who do you trust? I don't know. I mean, it would seem that Elon, who owns a solar company and division, and seems to understand science pretty well, says, man, you could have a, I don't know, what 50 by 50 mile stretch of solar, and you could provide power to the whole dang world, basically. And it's just free electricity that's out there. So it does feel like solar is where we need to go. And I wanted to mention, Jeff, an interesting story that came in front of me this week from the country we follow so closely, Pakistan, who has seen a remarkable surge in citizen installed solar projects. In just 8 months, Pakistani citizens, particularly farmers, installed solar panels equivalent to half the country's national electricity grid in just 8 months. And what's amazing about it, the world of connectivity, is that the reasons, like, why has this adoption been driven? Affordable solar panels, so they're getting cheaper. Social media influence, so they're watching TikTok tutorials on how to do this, and so people are just doing it. And then energy needs, as you maybe could guess, Pakistani electricity grids are kind of off and on or whatever, and so this provides a more stable amount of electricity. But more than half of their electricity in just 8 months is being put up. So it's a really interesting thing. I think we're going to see a lot more residential solar. Appraisers sort of can look past it, maybe shouldn't look past it, but have been able to. And we need to keep track of these changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think I see, a potential market moose field trip in the future headed to Pakistan to check this out on the on the ground. But interesting that a country like that can bring that much capacity relative to their current, base level online in that short a period of time. It's fascinating, Mark. I mean, that really caught my eye as well.
Boy, what a world! What a world! And to then have Trump sending out yesterday this like excoriation of solar and wind. I'm wondering. It would seem to me that Chamath would understand what the actual laws are motivating, and that this may be a hat tip to oil and gas or something. I don't know. Who knows? But just trying to make sense of it all.
Well, that's my default read, is that he has been a proponent of the oil and gas in particular. I think I don't know that I've heard him specifically opine on it, although maybe he has. But I think the administration is definitely more open to nuclear as well, and I think the technology around nuclear has improved from what it was in the past in terms of safety and that sort of thing. So I hear many advocate for kind of an all of the above approach to bringing electrical generation online. And certainly the technologies are good today. They're evolving, and, like AI, I expect they'll be better and more efficient in the future. So yeah, but no doubt that the demand and the need is certainly going up. It's just, how do you scale up the supply to match it? You bet. Jeff, we've got a few other topics on the docket. We are approaching our general cutoff here. So, what do you want to jump into? I got two quick hitters, Mark, that we can touch on. One that was just an interesting headline that continues to define like this evolving nature of buyers in the market. Both of these are kind of residential real estate related. One headline here was that now there are more home buyers over the age of 70 than under the age of 35. We've talked recently about the median age of a home buyer or a first-time home buyer, over 35. And it's just an interesting trend to see the evolving demographics. And a lot of this is a function of the cost of real estate today relative to what it was 5 and 10 years ago. What do you make of this headline? Yeah, boy. Well, first, I'm going to start following The Blubber, which is the name of this blog, which I love. But this trend, we spend some time in the Canadian market, and this trend certainly is true there. I would imagine in many other countries, it is the same trend. Housing affordability is tough. This promise of AI to make, earning an income and in establishing a career, like, what's the point? There's a little bit of that out there, maybe excusing the pursuit of some of those things. And of course, the affordability that we've just really run into with global inflation, interest rates rising the way they have, U.S. government printing money the way they have. All of these things, I think, are contributing to a real affordability problem. And
is David Friedberg, one of our other favorite podcast hosts on the All In podcast, talks about frequently that inflation and lack of affordability is where revolutions are created from. And I don't know if it's a physical revolution one way or another, but this cannot stand, man. I mean, this just has to reverse course, and no politician is going to hold office keeping this trend going.
I think that's right. I think everybody looks at it and says, well, what's the next generation supposed to do? And you and I have talked about kids and education. It's in the back of my mind, but it's not a reality that my kids are living yet. But you'd like for them to be able to afford a home to move into and get a home, earlier on in life and be able to build equity and all of that sort of thing. And I do think that the market has a way of working out some of these imbalances in the ways that they exist. I hope so anyway, but I think it'll have to be some of these trends that reverse course. At the end of the day, homes have to be affordable in order for the market to continue to be viable. It just doesn't seem to change quickly, but I do think that, like we talked about with the home builders, if they can help address that affordability issue, it certainly can get better.
By the way, Jeff, that was a really weak attempt at a Big Lebowski quote. So just wanted to get that cultural reference out there. But I think that this data point is likely among the data points around the thesis for Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett investing in Lennar and D.R. Horton. I think there is a connection there, and it is that, hey, these companies, these builders have a pathway to serve a wholly underserved market that has given up on home ownership on some level, and they're striking a chord with a certain segment. I think their challenge is to strike the more affordable, to even get more efficient with it and reach a larger percentage of the population. But I do think these things are connected quite well.
I think that's right. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. One tangent here. You commented on the blubber. We opined on some potential OnlyFans names for you. If we liked those, this one might be mine. I could adopt or something. If we get desperate enough and this podcast falls flat, then at least we have some alternative naming to move into.
There's a market for everything, Jeff.
Yes, whether or not I'm a participant in the market. No, that's exactly right. Well, I think the last thing, Mark, and this one's kind of a quick hitter, but it was just a point of interest is all. I found an article that summarized the top 10 most expensive zip codes around the country. Honestly, I don't know that any of this was terribly surprising, but interesting to see. I probably should have made you guess before I just kind of pulled back the curtain and unveiled the secret. But Fisher Island, Miami Beach is the most expensive zip code in the United States. That was interesting to see. Median price at just under $12 million for homes. Moving down, Newport Beach in California, Bridgehampton, New York, Bel Air in LA, Santa Barbara in California, and actually two zip codes in Santa Barbara. Beverly Hills, not a surprise, Watermill, New York, Rancho Santa Fe, California, Malibu, California. Not states, not locations that surprise anybody, but interesting to see the median price in these zip codes, range from 12 million to, or just under 12 million to just under $6 million, basically. Don't know if I'll be seeing you buying, taking up residence in any of these zip codes anytime soon, but probably not on the heels of the success of this podcast.
A few of these, Jeff, are sales of some rental properties that I had. So glad to have been able to move those. And at the same time, we won't get into it deeply here, but the wealthy that may be able to just use interest rates as a tool, but may not rely on them to live life and do business, are doing quite well, as these median home prices would show. In other headlines, condo prices have already dropped 12 to 26% in the 21 biggest cities through July. And it's the haves and have-nots, which I think goes to the more 70-year-old homeowners than 35, right? There are a lot of have-nots. It's growing, and that is not a good thing for any society to be working through. And I think this is at the core of the economic stimulus plan that Trump is hoping hits in 2026. We'll see, but change is certainly needed.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. The last point I had on that was, a handful of those, nearly half were in California. I'll tease, a potential future topic that we may take on, but we've both taken an interest in an episode or an interview that Tucker Carlson did with an economist
Oh, yeah.
talking about the Japanese economy from decades ago. And in an anecdote early on in the interview, he talked about the asset like overvaluation and inflation, and talked about kind of a central park in Japan on an inflated asset value base having a higher value than the entire state of California. And that stood out because half of these highest value zip codes are in California today. We'll have to dive deeper on that in another episode, but it just stood out, interesting how these asset values really can kind of overinflate and then have to eventually course correct. Sometimes it doesn't feel like they ever will, but they seem to at some point.
Boy, Jeff, I guess I'm becoming, I think, could be properly labeled as an economist nerd at this point. I've enjoyed following this. This podcast has really helped us or helped me in that pursuit. And to tease that, it's an incredible interview, and it is challenging. It is the only rational explanation for the increase in asset valuation in an economy like that, which happened in Japan in the early 90s, is that banks create money when they lend. And it's a fascinating and shocking assertion, I guess. And it does seem true, and it's not how any of us think. Governments create money, not banks, but that is not how this economist can prove things are happening. So really interesting, and I think we'll cover that in depth here on one of the upcoming episodes.
Yeah, I couldn't resist teeing it up or teasing it out just a little bit. But yeah, all of this relates back to markets, how they operate, what happens, within them. And it's fascinating to observe and try to understand. So give us something to look forward to next time anyway, Mark.
Very good. Well, Jeff, happy fantasy football drafting, and until next time.
Very good.